There's only one issue. And that issue is whether a nation that has weapons of mass destruction is an imminent threat to the security of this country. And the same 16 U.S. intelligence agencies that said Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, we found out later that they were wrong because he destroyed them all in 1991 at the end of the Persian Gulf War. They were sensible enough to realize that Hussein was not an imminent threat to the security of this country. Come on. It's a joke. If Will Rogers, the old humorist, if you were alive today and someone said that Hussein was an imminent threat to the security of this country, he'd probably say something like this: that's the most unheard of thing I ever heard of. Now let me give you in just one sentence. I'll give you in just one sentence why he's not an imminent threat. I'll tell you why. There's no way you can get around it. No possible way. He's not an imminent threat because Hussein wanted to live. And when you want to live, you do not attack the United States of America or help anyone else do so. It's as simple as that. You cannot get around it. Here's someone who slept in a different bed every night. He had about 20 doubles. I'm trying to think of some of the other things that Hussein did. He had 2 separate food tasters, testing every morsel of food he ate. There's a supporter. No, I know that. I can just tell. He's got to think about it. He wants to go after Bush. And at the moment, he's going after the ankle of Christina. Anyway, where did we find Hussein? Where did we find him? Hiding like a rat at the bottom of an 8-foot spider hole. And he told his captors, don't shoot. So Hussein wanted to live. And therefore, he was not an imminent threat to this country. But George Bush got up and told millions of unsuspecting Americans the exact opposite of what he knew to be the truth. It's on page 8 of a 91-page document. But it gets worse than that, as if that's not bad enough. What could be worse than telling millions of unsuspecting Americans the exact opposite of what your own CIA has told you? But it gets worse than that. Because 3 days later, on October the 4th, the Bush administration put out an unclassified summary version of this October 1st classified report. The reason they made it an unclassified version is they wanted to give the summary version to Congress and the American people. And this unclassified version came to be known as the White Paper. And in this White Paper, in which U.S. intelligence said that Hussein was not an imminent threat to security of this country, what did Bush and his people do? They deleted that entire conclusion from what they gave Congress and the American people. That White Paper did not contain that conclusion. Completely deleted. A couple other things that were deleted. In that top secret classified report, in the area of nuclear arms, there were several important dissents. All of those dissents were deleted from the White Paper that was given to Congress and the American people. There's no end to the immorality of these people. They're supposed to be so religious and patriotic and all that stuff. Also in the top secret report, the conclusion that Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, there was a preface to it. It was stated as an opinion. We assessed that, or we judged that. Hussein has weapons of mass destruction. Those words in the White Paper that was given to Congress, those words, we assessed that, we judged that, were all taken out. So what we have here, as I told Congress, I said, we're talking here about a matter of war and peace, with the safety and lives of millions of human beings at that time hanging in the balance. And under those circumstances, and with Congress about to vote in just 1 week on whether or not to authorize George Bush to go to war, October 11th, do you folks know of anything that could possibly be worse and more criminal than the Bush administration deliberately keeping this all-important conclusion from Congress and the American people? And yet, unbelievably, there's no other word for it, they got away with all of this. And how evil and perverse and sick and criminal can Bush and his people be? But so far, up to this point, they're getting away with it. And now this courageous, brave, honorable woman has stepped forward and said, enough, we're going to do something about it. I'm here to help her out. We've got to do it. We have no choice. I would never be able to look at myself in the mirror if I didn't pursue this guy to the end of the earth. So I'd say, Bugliosi, who are you? You make a lot of noise, but when it comes right down to it, you went in the opposite direction. I'm not going to do it. I'm going to pursue him. but I need the authority from her. She's the person that has all the clout. I don't have any independent clout. So I'm hanging on to her coattails. I follow her around like a puppy wherever she goes. Okay. There's other evidence that I could talk about, but I think we found out today that there were some very spirited questions from the audience. Should we open this up to questions and answers? Do you want to say anything
I just
more?
wanted to say a little bit about my opponent.
Okay, good.
So,
Yeah.
okay, exactly.
This is slowly sinking down.
Yes.
Raise it up.
Well, actually, the first person to come out against my candidacy was not the incumbent Attorney General. It was the Republican National Committee, interestingly enough. I had announced my candidacy with Vincent at my side back on September 18th, and the AP reporter apparently called the White House for a comment, and the White House would not comment. Instead, they deferred and told him to go to the Republican National Committee, which is very interesting because ostensibly the RNC now is under the control of the new leader of the Republican Party, McCain. But here we have, and McCain is trying to distance himself from Bush, but when it comes to Bush's crimes, then it's the Republican National Committee has to, cover for him, I guess. So their response was on a blog on the Wall Street Journal, and the spokesperson for the RNC tried to marginalize me. First of all, they would not even mention that I had chosen Vince as my special prosecutor should I win. And I found this, that whenever there's an effort to discredit me, they will not mention Vince, for obvious reasons. Because you've got probably the top prosecutor in the country coming in to do the prosecution. And who's going to argue against him? I mean, it's going to be hard, and it has been hard, by the way. So far, we have not gotten one serious legal critique of what he is saying. But they will try to marginalize me. So the RNC tried to marginalize me as a fringe element. And the way I turned it around on them was to say that there had been a poll, a CBS poll that was done 5 years ago, in which it was stated that the majority of Americans believed that this war had been conducted on a fraudulent basis. And that was 5 years ago, and of course the American people have learned a lot more since then. So I had suggested that the fringe element occupy the White House, and that these were the people that were completely out of touch with the sentiments of the people in the nation, and most definitely with the people in Vermont. So that is how I handled it, and my response is on my website, charlottedennett4attorneygeneral.com. If you go and you find the commentary to the Wall Street Journal blog, I think you will find it very fascinating. Because, if you really want to sink your teeth into this debate, it goes in many different directions, and it's very fascinating. For me, of course, the whole question is holding our leaders accountable for what they do. And it seems that there has been a serious problem, certainly on the federal level and in Congress. And but anyway, I want to get into what my opponent, William Sorrell, had to say. We faced off in our first debate a couple of weeks ago, Channel 17, which is community television in Burlington, and he was equally dismissive and said, all she wants to do is just throw these issues out there. And this is a violation of an attorney's ethics, because ethically speaking, an attorney should seek justice.
Can you imagine that?
I was flabbergasted. But what did he think I was doing this for?
The whole point of what you're doing is
exactly.
to seek justice.
That's right.
He's telling you that you're not seeking justice.
That's correct. I don't know. I was really floored by that. as a matter of fact, I was so floored that I went to the Vermont Bar Association office, and I have the code of ethics. It's hanging on my wall, but I thought, is there some other code of ethics that I'm not aware of? So I got the piece of paper, and basically, I forgot to bring it with me, it's in the car, but basically it says an attorney will not engage in frivolous frivolous lawsuits. That's basically the shorthand of what it's saying. And apparently that's what he's suggesting that I'm doing. And once again, I mean, I think this man is really out of touch with what Americans feel about this war, how angry they are, that there's been such a willful violation of the rule of law by George Bush and other members of his administration. So I challenged him on that. And I really just asked them, I said, do you really care? I did. I asked them that on another debate. I think it was the VPR. Do you really care about what happened to those soldiers? The Vermont soldiers, for sure. I believe it's 23 at last count, that have died because they went to war thinking they were doing it for patriotic reasons, but in fact it was for a lie. Do you care about that? How about the 4,000 that have died? Over 100,000 civilians. At any rate, I've also challenged him on the question of jurisdiction. He says that it can't happen in Vermont. You know, you have to have the body in Vermont. And he was saying that, you know, how could you prosecute Bush for murder when Bush, at last I knew, hasn't even come to Vermont? We're the only state where Bush hasn't set foot. Maybe because of Brattleboro, I'm not sure. But, and their threat to arrest him, the citizens, if he did set foot. I really don't know the reason why he decided not to come to Vermont. But the point is, he doesn't know the law. And I challenged him on this too. I said, first of all, Mr. Sorrell, Vincent Bugliosi sent a copy of his book to every attorney general in the country, and you chose not to read it because he lays out all the arguments for why it can happen in Vermont. And secondly, I have put those legal arguments on my website, and you would think that if you knew that somebody was challenging you on the law, that you would check out what this person is saying. And I don't recall his response to that. I don't think he had a very good response. So you can draw one or two conclusions. Either he doesn't know the law, or he willfully does not want to know the law. And if he willfully does not want to know the law, then the question is, why? I have not had that answered to my satisfaction, but I will say that there is a movement in Vermont, and not just in Vermont, I'm sorry, but there's a movement around the country in which lawyers are now seriously looking at the role of the separate states to use murder statutes to go after these individuals who have so willfully broken the law. And the reason is because the federal government has let us down, Congress has been weak-kneed, impeachment isn't going anywhere, and I don't know how many of you saw the article in the Boston Review of Books, but there was one recently in which the question was asked. We've got so much evidence against these people, against Bush and Cheney and the rest. What are we going to do? What is a citizen to do? We're just going to let them go scot-free? And so that's why prosecuting Bush on using murder statutes in the state of Vermont is so important. This is not trivial or funny. This is very serious. This is the next stage to our preserving our democracy, as far as I'm concerned. Because if we walk away from this, then we're letting these criminals go scot-free. And I, in my conscience, cannot have that happen.
Well, not only that, if we let them go scot-free, God only knows.
Right. No, they'll keep doing it. And one of the ideas, another additional idea, is the deterrence factor. They've got to know that it's not going to happen anymore. That we, the citizens in our different states, and certainly the citizens of Vermont, are insisting on holding them accountable so that they don't do it again, so that the next occupants of the White House don't take us to war based on lies. I could get into jurisdiction, but I've already talked too long. And so I think the best thing to do...
I'm enjoying what you're saying.
Oh, you are?
So
Oh, yeah? Oh, you are? All right. Well, just a couple things. I mean, he was saying that, all right, that you know, George Bush never set foot in the state of Vermont, so how can you do it? Well, one way that you establish jurisdiction that gives me authority to prosecute him is through the underlying crime of conspiracy to murder. And with that underlying crime, all you need, there's two elements, right? One of them is that George Bush had to have entered into an agreement with one or more other people in his administration, let us say, to carry out an overt act to further the conspiracy. And according to the law, it's the overt act that has to take place in Vermont to establish jurisdiction. So, what are the overt acts? I'll name two of them. One of them is that Bush got before the television cameras and sent a message through the television to the people of Vermont, lying and trying to convince them that they had to go to war because Saddam Hussein was an imminent threat and because he was part of 9/11. That was the overt act. His message that went through the television, and who is going to deny that there were Vermonters sitting in their living room who said, I'll sign up, I'm going to go to war, and they did. And another overt act would be the recruitment of these soldiers in Vermont. Okay, so that is establishing the underlying crime of conspiracy to commit murder. And you don't even need a body for that underlying crime. So then you get down to the crime of murder itself. And in that case, you have to think about the state of mind of the criminal and whether he was engaged in express malice or implied malice when he wanted to engage in sending troops abroad unlawfully. And many people ask about the question of was there an intent to kill? You know, some people will say, oh, you know, he didn't really intend to kill soldiers when he launched this war. And look, I mean, we can say, yeah, he didn't intend to kill, you know, soldier A and soldier B and so on. But by intent, what we do mean is that he absolutely knew that he was sending soldiers off into harm's way with the likelihood or the good possibility of death resulting. He knew that. And even if he didn't, let's just say for the sake of argument that he didn't know, then you get into the element called implied malice, which is that he certainly sent soldiers to war willfully and knowingly, that he was doing it with reckless disregard for the consequences. He was engaged in a reckless act because he knew that they would die, and he also knew that he was doing it under false pretenses. So we believe that that we can show murder. Do you want to elaborate on that?
I just want to elaborate.
You're much smoother.
No. Everything you're saying is very, very, very good. On the issue of jurisdiction for murder,
Yeah.
as you know very, very well, the effects.
Yeah. All right. So I got off the judge. Yeah.
The
Go
effects
ahead.
doctrine. The basic law throughout the country on a federal and state level is that, let's take a state. The basic law throughout the country on a state and federal level, let's talk about the state right now. The state can only prosecute for a crime if it was committed within the territorial jurisdiction of the state. So a murder committed in Ohio, you folks here in Vermont would not have jurisdiction to prosecute that murder in Ohio. However, there's a very well-recognized exception to that rule of territorial jurisdiction. And it's covered in depth in the book, federal and on state level. It's called the effects doctrine, If a crime is committed outside of the state, outside of Vermont, but it has a very, very injurious effect on the people within the state, then that state has jurisdiction even though the crime was committed outside the state. Now certainly when you lose Vermont soldiers over there, that has an effect on you folks, right? Not only that, but the war has cost close to $1 trillion. You've shared in that. That's very adverse. Also the loss of prestige around the world. Vermont's a very proud state, and yet when people talk about America, you're a part of America, they're looking down on America now. So there's absolutely no question that the war that took place in Iraq had a very adverse, injurious, deleterious effect on the people here in Vermont. No question whatsoever. It's called the effects doctrine. It goes all the way back to 1910, United States Supreme Court case, Oliver Wendell Jones Holmes Jr., you've heard of him. A case called Strasshorn versus Daley talked about the effects doctrine, that a state can prosecute for any crime, even if it was not committed within its jurisdiction, if it had an adverse effect. In the book, I cite a case, just to give you an example, how little the effect has to be. A fellow by the name of Benitez, he's a Colombian citizen, lives in Colombia, and he conspires with someone in Colombia to rob and assault 2 DEA agents in Colombia. They get a hold of him in Florida. The Florida District Court files a complaint against him, and he raises the jurisdiction issue. He said, wait a while. Under Title 18, United States Code, Section 1111, Subdivision B, you don't have jurisdiction in Florida because the crime that you say I committed took place in Colombia, and you only have jurisdiction to prosecute crimes within the United States of America. That's your territorial jurisdiction. Colombia is not included. And the court said, no, wait, you're wrong. It took place in Colombia, that assault and robbery of 2 DEA agents, but it had an adverse effect on the United States of America. And they said, we have jurisdiction. They were only talking about, what, 2 DEA agents, a robbery and assault. A fortiori, in the law, it means all the more so, where you lose 23 citizens. That's cost the state, well, if it's cost the country close to $1 trillion, what would that cost the people of Vermont? Whatever your share is. We're talking about an enormous amount of money. So there's no question that Vermont has jurisdiction to prosecute for the murder of the 23 soldiers who died over there. And this guy, Sorrell, maybe I should call him a guy, but this fellow Sorrell, he tells you, number one, that you're not seeking justice in this case. Did he say what you were seeking if you weren't seeking justice? That's the whole purpose of this book. That's the whole purpose of the lawsuit, to bring about justice for the American people. And justice can only be brought about for the American people if George Bush is brought to justice. And the other thing is, as the Attorney General of the state, he's the chief law enforcement officer of the state. He's supposed to know more about the law than any of you folks. And he doesn't know about the effects doctrine.
Well, the thing that's amazing,
he doesn't know about it.
The thing that's amazing to me, and I challenge him on this, is that in the civil area of the law, he understands the effects doctrine all too well. In fact, he boasted about it in an article in the Rutland Herald, I believe it was Rutland Herald, where he said, you know, I'd be run out of town, I'd be voted out of office if I didn't prosecute polluters who are out of state but cause harm in state. And I challenged him. In fact, he even used the word, if they have a harmful effect in the state. And so I said to him, well, it's the same concept. And he said, oh, well, that my area is civil law and that's criminal law. Well, it doesn't take, you know, rocket science to sort of wrap their head around this justice, this concept, sorry. And so, you know, he's obviously avoiding the issue for whatever reason. And I find that very disappointing, frankly. I would like to challenge him to a debate. In fact, let's say tonight we're challenging William Sorrell to a debate.
YouTube is picking that up.
Yes.
I'll be present.
Will you be present? And he can. The Attorney General can pick someone else to sit by his side, since he apparently has a little trouble with the law. And we will talk about the jurisdiction.
And then if he says yes now, we'll ask him, when did he learn that, you know, that Vermont has jurisdiction?
Yes.
If he says no, I'll start citing, I'll open the book up and cite cases. Did you read this page? And say no. No, there's no question about jurisdiction. And the dean of the law school, the Massachusetts School of Law, Dean Bugliosi, said that Vermont has jurisdiction.
Yes.
It's all set forth in Vincent Bugliosi.
And it's all the more important that Vermont now has jurisdiction, precisely because the federal government has let us down so much.
Right.
So it devolves to us. So it's very, very important for you, in this limited time left, to spread the words to your friends about this campaign. Because, you know, there are people all around the country that are looking at Vermont now. I cannot tell you the response that I've been getting. Part of it is because Vince has been out there talking all over the country about his book and about my candidacy. And so now we're at the stage where I'm ready, certainly, to go out, meet voters, come to different parts of the state, but I really need your help. I need you to contact not only your friends, but your family. And, you know, if each one of you contacted 5 people and asked them to spread the word, there's no saying what we might be able to do. And do you know that great quote from Calvin Coolidge?
Yeah, it's right here. Charlotte told me about it. Apparently it's on the Vermont State House wall. This quote of Calvin Coolidge. I don't know if you know, but Calvin Coolidge was known as Silent Cal, because it was almost impossible to get even a yes or no answer out of him. You'd ask him a question, he'd nod one way or the other. But this guy, who had a very difficult time speaking, apparently, found himself sufficiently motivated to say this about the state of Vermont. He said, quote, "If the spirit of liberty should vanish in other parts of the country and faith in our institutions should languish, it could all be replenished from the generous store held by the people of the brave little state of Vermont." Probably the longest speech that Calvin Coolidge ever gave. But you folks, you're known for your fierce independence, and I can tell you that a lot of people around this country just want Bush to go away. But someone has got to pay for all the death and the horror and the suffering and the screams and the sea of blood and the decapitations and the mutilations of bodies. Someone has got to pay. Now, who's supposed to pay? The person responsible for all that. And that person's name is George W. Bush. And we're going to work together as a team to make sure that he pays. There's only one way he can pay, and that's if we prosecute him. We're going to do it if you folks get behind this lady right here. But not just by your vote individually. You've got to contribute money, talk to your neighbors, your friends. Yes, you have a question.
I do. A couple things. Everything you say about Bush and his Republicans is true. However, it's almost equally true for the Democrats who have been in a position to do something about this for the last 2 years.
I know.
And refuse to do
They haven't
that.
done anything.
So my question is, two distinct possibilities here. One distinct possibility is that Bush decides to pardon himself, which I think that's unprecedented, but so is many other things.
Yeah.
Number two possibility.
Do you want me to address that first issue first, or do you want to? Okay.
And the second problem, so even if he does not pull that together, if Charlotte gets elected, or if the DA in Indiana responds to a letter he got this week asking for the same thing to happen, some attorney somewhere prosecutes this case, the chances of the great healer, Obama, bringing us together, issuing a pardon, are probably as great as your efforts issuing one to Nixon.
Okay. Let's talk about the first thing.
Do you have recourse if that happens?
Yeah, we're covered. Okay. We don't know whether Bush can pardon himself. The Constitution is silent on that issue. Most constitutional scholars say he cannot pardon himself. Why? Because it's violative of an old common law legal principle, goes all the way back to the 14th century in England, that a man cannot sit in judgment of himself, okay? But the Constitution is silent on that issue. There's no question that Obama or McCain could pardon him. But when I spoke at the Massachusetts School of Law at Andover, I said something that I definitely sensed that several of the scholars out there did not know. I'm sure many of them knew it, but I definitely sensed that many did not know it. And I quoted Article 2, Section 2 of the United States Constitution, which very clearly says there's no ambiguity, none whatsoever, that the pardoning power is limited to, quote, offenses against the United States of America, unquote. The United States is not Vermont. We're a part of it. You're a part of it. But when they say offenses against the United States, they're talking about federal crimes. If someone is indicted
by the federal government. The complaint or the indictment reads United States of America versus so-and-so. Here, I would imagine, same as California, would be people of the state of California or Vermont versus so-and-so. It's a different statute. So the law is very clear that he could only pardon whoever, Obama or McCain, could only pardon Bush for Section 1111, Subdivision A of Title 18 of the U.S. Code. That's the federal murder statute. They do not have the power to pardon on a state level. But even on a federal level, they're going to think twice. I'm not a contemporary historian, but it seems to be the consensus that when Ford pardoned Nixon, that was the main reason he lost when he ran for re-election. And what Nixon did, I mean, doesn't even compare with what Bush did, right? We're talking about obstruction of justice, wiretapping, stuff like that. And apparently there was so much opposition to it that when he ran for re-election, that was the main reason, I've read, why he lost. Can you imagine what the opposition would be if Barack Obama or John McCain thought of pardoning Bush for over 4,000 murders?
But recent history also shows that presidents or parties that pursued impeachment, whether it was a worthy impeachment or not, gained in the next election. And yet, in the face of all that history, the Democratic Party has refused to follow suit. So I wouldn't be surprised.
But the pardon would have no control over what Charlotte Dennett does here in the state of Vermont. It's limited to offenses against the United States, not against an individual state.
What if he runs away to Uruguay?
Pardon? Well, the country's Paraguay.
Paraguay.
Yeah, apparently he and his father and his family have purchased a lot of acres down there, thousands of acres in Paraguay. And Paraguay does not have an extradition treaty with the United States of America. That could create a little bit of a problem if you were to flee down there. Yes, Emily?
Here in Brattleboro, we know Sorrell as a person who will cover for the police and let them get away with murder. And we know that perhaps a lot of the state's attorneys in the state depend on Sorrell to cover for their bad actions.
Yeah, do you want to explain it? Because
a number of
That's
years,
not uncommon, you know, for DAs and state attorney generals
Exactly.
to cozy up to the police.
Exactly.
They should not do that.
Exactly.
Obviously, they should not do that.
And from what I understand, you have a population who wants the same thing you do. However, you don't see that reflected in the elected positions of state's attorneys around the country, as well as we don't see it happening in Congress. So my question, or my belief is that this is one avenue through having a state's attorney prosecute and through the jurisdiction. However, the law belongs to the people. There must be a way that the people themselves, en masse,
En what?
En masse, E-N-M-A-S-S-E,
en masse, yeah.
can as well bring criminal charges. Must be.
Private citizens can't do that, Emily. You can bring a civil action,
Private citizens
or monetary
or
damages,
grand
but
jury.
it's either a U.S. attorney or a state attorney or a district attorney. You have to have authority to do that. Private citizens cannot bring criminal
private
actions.
citizens can form a grand jury.
Pardon?
I know grand juries are basically run by DAs and
Well, some federal, state, or local prosecutor has to take the case to the grand jury. I mean, citizens can't get together and decide to prosecute. I know you have your thing here in Brattleboro, but in fact, the town attorney cannot indict, only a grand jury. But you have to have a DA, state attorney, or U.S. attorney take the case to the grand jury. Yeah, way in the back.
Is the legal point. I would love to, I want you to prove me wrong, but when you said you're not, I feel like you're having it both ways. Would that affect business? If the Vermont is part of the U.S., and so the crime which is against, you know where I'm going, where I was.
Okay,
Before when you were saying that.
the killing took place in Iraq, but it had an sorry.
Well, when you were saying only, it was about the crime against, in Article 2, it has to be, the crime was committed against the United States, but then you sort of said Vermont isn't the United States, but you can't have it both ways. I mean, I want it to happen, but Vermont is part of the United States, so...
Yeah, but Vermont is not the United States. It's a state in the United States.
Right, but aren't you telling it the other way when we're talking about that affects business?
Frequently, the Constitution talks about states within the United States. And here they didn't do that. They just said the United States, not states within the United States.
But that's
Vermont is not the United States. It's pretty good and pretty big and pretty powerful and pretty wonderful, but it's not the United States. It's one state.
Yeah, but if the effects situation works, then why aren't we also...
You're talking about a different issue now. You're confusing jurisdiction with the pardoning
I'm
power.
afraid somebody will make my point and make it better than I'm doing.
Well, you're confusing jurisdiction with the pardoning power. They're two separate things. Effects is the jurisdiction.
Okay.
And the pardoning power is against the United States.
Right.
Two separate
Why
issues.
would someone not argue that our state is part of the United States?
It's part of it, but it's not the United States.
Vermont.
No, wait a minute. Vermont is a part of the United States, but it's not the United States.
It's also the way the law is constructed and codified, okay?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's the United States Code of Criminal Justice,
There's US
not the
law,
state
no, I
code.
understand all
There's
that.
federal law, and then there's
State
Some
law.
statutes, some other attorney may be able to read it differently.
Well, they can argue anything they want, but I don't think there's any ambiguity in Article 2, Section 2. Yeah.
George W. Bush might have more counts of war crimes than Saddam. Is there a way to bring him into an international court so he could be tried internationally? He could be like arrested with handcuffs and hauled away?
There is an international criminal court at The Hague. It was formed in 2002 in Rome, and that agreement specifically said that if someone in a particular country has violated the law, we can't go after him unless that country is signatory to this agreement. And the United States conveniently was not signatory to that agreement in Rome in 2002. So the ICC does not have jurisdiction over George Bush. Not a signatory. And there were other paragons of liberty that refused to sign that agreement, like Saudi Arabia and Pakistan. But virtually every country in the world signed it, except the United States and countries like Saudi Arabia and Iran. And
If the presumptive President Obama signs the signature, becomes a signatory, can they then establish?
Yes. Yeah. If Obama. Yeah. Very good point. But there's another problem.
What about
that would solve that problem. But in the agreement that was signed in Rome, they specifically say that that court there, the ICC, is a court of last resort. They say we will only take jurisdiction if the subject country is unable or unwilling to bring the prosecution. Now, we may be unwilling to bring the prosecution over here, but this book says we are not unable to do so. You follow? So I don't think the court, by its own language, the ICC, could take jurisdiction here, because they can say the United States can prosecute Bush, and they're choosing not to do so. It's a court of last resort. The other big problem is that the Security Council, 5 members of the Security Council, each member has a veto. And I think Britain, would veto any effort to bring Bush to justice at the ICC. But that's a very good point you made.
I have 2 comments.
Well, you say 2.
This is John Stern. I got 1 comment and 1 question. The comment is, we can only hope, but Obama, way back in April, made a comment which was not very well covered. He said in the Obama administration, there will be an investigation by his Justice Department of any crimes of the previous investigation.
Yes, I know he said that. I know.
And
which is encouraging.
It is encouraging, and he reaffirmed it about a month ago. We could only hope on that. Here's the question. I'm not a lawyer. However, I want to move this question of who can bring the charges up. When we were running, and Kurt will fill in the details because I'm hazy now a few months later, when we were running the indictment resolution here, there were lawyers, attorneys, who brought up a concept called common law application, which substantiated that the town of Brattleboro, for example, if they want to, can have jurisdiction because fill me in on what common law application was, any town does have jurisdiction to apply federal law at the local level if a crime was committed. If a federal crime was committed at the local level, then the town's attorney or some official of the town, based on, quote, common law application, does have jurisdiction to do it. Is there any
Well, we don't have-
way to run with that?
The common law is unwritten law. Actually, it's written by the courts in cases, but it's not statutory law. We don't have common law in this country anymore.
It's the name of it.
But common law has been codified now under statutes. That may have been true. I'm not aware of that. But not today.